Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show. I'm Richard Harris, your host. What an honor it is for me to be able to share with you today, and I'm so thankful that you're joining us. Today, we're going to continue our discussion, as we have on several recent programs, about issues of national security. You know, it was President Ronald Reagan that kind of made famous the saying of peace through strength. And I agree totally with peace through strength. I think it's the only way to achieve peace in today's world, or really in any world. We are still living in a fallen world. And the adversaries of a freedom-loving nation like the United States of America generally are not interested in moral reasons for peace. They tend to speak one language, and that's the language of money and the language of force. But you know, there's so much happening in the world today that sometimes it's hard to keep track of everything. Our traditional relationships as a nation seem to be in a bit of flux. And I believe that part of that is because the United States is once again asserting itself as an advocate for strength, peace through strength, but also for fairness and equality in our relationships. Take, for example, the recent trade wars that have sort of started under President Donald Trump. As he's imposing tariffs and threatening to impose tariffs on other nations, it's funny how he says, we're going to impose a reciprocal tariff, for example, on Canada. Canada's already imposing tariffs on the United States, and they turn around and say, well, we're going to impose reciprocal tariffs back. Well, now it's no longer reciprocal again. We got to impose more. I suppose that's how it goes if you feel like you're in the right. What about the war in the Ukraine? You know, as Donald Trump is trying to bring the parties together, and, you know, he begins by leaning on the president of Ukraine. His basic messages to Ukraine is, listen, you can't just continue to rely on the gravy train of American money for your war. And you've got to come to the table and do some things. And people get all offended about that because, oh, they're thinking of Ukraine as the victim. And then you have Russia coming back and imposing what it's saying, these are the conditions that must be met. This is a tricky situation for Donald Trump. Will his New York real estate, years of experience negotiating real estate deals pay off as he attempts to negotiate possibly the biggest real estate deal he's ever seen, which is to end this massive war in the Ukraine and Eastern Europe? How about Hamas and Gaza and Israel? What a difficult situation that is. It's one you might say of biblical proportions, right? This conflict has been going on almost since time began. And yet, Trump is going into a situation where, you know, the Hamas has inflicted heinous atrocities on the nation of Israel. Hamas's sworn objective is the eradication of Israel. And the Gaza Strip lays in ruins. And he's proposing that the United States take it over and run it as a tourist place and as a Riviera of the Middle East, shocking the world with his remarks, literally. But you know what had happened is his remarks, even though they seem outrageous to people, they're certainly outside the box, for one thing, but it's causing the Arab nations of the region, who would hate to see the United States actually own the Gaza Strip, they're now coming to the table with serious proposals about what to do in the Gaza Strip. And then you have Greenland, of all places. Trump shocks the world when he says, I think we're going to buy Greenland. Of course, that was the first that Denmark had ever heard of that, and they own Greenland. And Trump is continuing to push this issue of potential annexation of Greenland. I mean, the man thinks so outside the box, sometimes it's shocking to hear his proposals. Who knows what he ultimately really has in mind? And then we have the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accords, you know, and then we have the withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal. If you don't understand Donald Trump's mindset, you might think that he's a renegade, that he's got a screw loose, that maybe he's half nuts, that he's jeopardizing world peace. But here's the truth of the matter, I think. The truth of the matter is that America is first to Donald Trump. You know, he said all the time in his campaign, both first and second campaign, America first. He's got an entire policy organization called America First. He's got a legal organization called America First. You see, Donald Trump understands that it's time to level the playing field, not just with our enemies, but with our allies. Because for 70 years, 80 years, America has been footing the bill for the security of Europe. Well, the Cold War is over. It's been over for a long time in Europe. Now, Russia is still a problem and still a threat. But there's no reason why the United States needs to be paying 3/4 of the military costs for defending Europe. And certainly in the Ukraine, a third world country still, that is, thousands of miles away from the United States of America, why should we be paying $300 billion for arms to support the Ukraine? This is a European problem first and foremost. Trump, of course, recognizes that. And if you look at all these other situations, it's the same thing. It's a combination of America first and an old real estate negotiator coming in to fix the problem. And I think we should be excited about it because it's bringing a breath of fresh air, creative solutions, and it's putting our country's needs and position first. Some of his statements might even be pure negotiating posturing, where you take an extreme position just so that you could begin the dialogue far beyond what you really expect to get, so that when you do reach a compromise, it's going to come away as a win for you. The other thing about Donald Trump that you have to understand is he has no tolerance for Islamic terrorism. He understands what it is, an evil scourge on humanity that needs to be dealt with no tolerance whatsoever. This idea of a two-state solution in Israel, you can forget about that under Donald Trump. There's no way he's going to allow the Palestinians, who are run by terrorists, to have the status of a nation state, where they can claim diplomatic immunity and all the other international privileges and have a seat at all the international tables and all this other sort of thing and the cloak of legitimacy all about them. It's absurd. And he doesn't play games. Look at how he's treating Iran. He's announced extreme policy to sanction Iran and to limit their ability. They're the #1 state sponsor of terror in the world, responsible for thousands and thousands of deaths. He just unleashed a massive drone strike on the weapons positions of the Houthis, who are a terror proxy for Iran in the Arabian Peninsula. And so I think these are actually good times for America. What you're feeling, folks, what you're feeling, if you feel alarmed, is you're feeling a transition happening. And when you implement peace through strength in the initial phases of the strength, the assertion of strength, and the build up to a strengthened position, you will feel uncertainty. Because those enemies that have been allowed to gain ground have been allowed to become entrenched in the meantime when we were weak and passive and docile. Well, they're not just going to sit there, right, and allow us to do what we want. They're going to fight back. Plus the propaganda wing, the Democratic Party and their propaganda wing, the mainstream media, plus all the foreign influences like the millions of dollars the Muslims spend on propaganda in the United States, all of those are going to work to create that sense of alarm and fear, as if the United States is going to lose its position of influence, is going to be in danger of attack, and so forth. But the truth is that most of the world welcomes the position of leadership that Donald Trump is attempting to assert. Because most of the world, the people of the world, need freedom and want freedom. And they look to the U.S. as the example for freedom and as the moral authority on the world stage. This is who we are, who we're destined to be by God as a nation. And the last 4 years, and then before Trump's first administration, the 8 years before him, of Barack Obama, and then if you go back even further, the Bill Clinton administration, and all these Democrat presidential administrations, we did not live up to that duty that is upon us to lead the world with biblical values and freedom and strength. Instead, we kowtow to liberal causes like woke ideology. God forbid, hanging the LGBT rainbow flag at the American embassy in foreign nations, spending millions and billions of dollars to promote immorality, sexual perversion, and homosexuality and transgenderism in foreign nations. It's unthinkable what has happened under the Biden administration. So thank God that Donald Trump is back at the helm and is aggressively eliminating these things. The question is Donald Trump causing lasting harm by alienating our allies and by stoking our enemies? It's true, he's walking a tightrope. On the one hand, Europe is stepping up in the arena of military spending. They've announced they're going to be increasing their defense budgets. But is America becoming Europe's adversary? Are we actually unifying the nations of Europe in a way that will weaken our leadership role? These are questions that remain to be seen. But I do believe that in the end, things are going to play out. Wisdom is going to prevail. Europe will understand that it is their duty to take care of this situation. And Donald Trump and the United States of America will come away from the situation in the Ukraine more highly respected than we were before, because what he's doing is right, and it is the only way forward to bring peace. So what about China, though? You know, China is our number one adversary. They're the biggest, they're the strongest, they're the most aggressive for sure. Recent comments by their leadership there in China where they said that if it's a war the United States wants, then China is ready to win that war because, you know, China is seeing us begin to change our posture. And so they're saying we're wanting war. Well, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, his response was, we're prepared, but it won't be us that starts the war. Perfect answer. The only problem with Hegseth's response is the United States prepared for war with China? And everybody I talk to says, no, we're really not. We have been not taking this threat seriously for a long, long time. I think for probably 35 years. You might remember back in the 1990s it was. In fact, a Republican Congress under President Bill Clinton decided to grant to China, a communist dictatorship, most favored nation status so that America could deal with them in a trade and financial manner with freedom. And once they did that, money started pouring out of the United States, building factories and all kinds of things in China, so because we could get our goods and stuff made there at pennies on the dollar compared to what we would have to pay here. So businesses here naturally did that. But here's what China did. They took the millions and then billions and billions of dollars that they began to make on all of this new economic buildup, and they spent it on their military. They spent it on their Navy, on their Army, on their Air Force. They now have, you know, a massive intercontinental ballistic missile nuclear fleet. They have satellites in space. They have technology in some ways that's even more advanced than ours. They have a 1 million-man army. They have 400 ships in their Navy. They have the largest troop transport the world has ever seen that could take literally 10,000 troops across the China Strait to Taiwan. I'm telling you, folks, we have been a fool. We have been played for a fool by China. They have infiltrated the all-American systems and our culture, our government, our educational institutions, our businesses, our infrastructure. And we need to get extremely serious about dealing with this Chinese threat. I'm hoping that Donald Trump will do it. I know that he can, but we don't have much time to work with here. Military superiority is an absolute essential, and it's going to cost a lot of money. Economic prosperity is also essential. Overspending, dangerous levels of debt, $37 trillion now, have imperiled our country, have imperiled the security of the dollar. Unless the dollar remains the reserve currency of the world, we are in big trouble. And even if it does remain the reserve currency, we are in big trouble. We have got to preserve our standing as the economic leader of the world, and China is aggressively trying to undermine that. Our influence in the world today is directly proportional to our economic prowess. So we've got to stop this borrowing and spending on, foolish, needless programs that do nothing. All of this LGBT, DEI, and 1,000 other federal government programs spending hundreds of billions of dollars on things that don't ever accomplish anything. We also need to assert leadership on the issues that matter, on freedom, on human rights. Not on the woke agenda. Not only is this right to support the cause of freedom and human rights, it helps establish freedom in these other nations and builds our reputation as the moral authority. We must continue to push back against the leftist globalist agenda. This could create a schism in the West because Europe is wholesale given over to woke ideology. But what's the alternative, folks? What's the alternative? If we continue down the path of Joe Biden, we are looking at the Great Reset in 2035. The World Economic Forum announced that they wanted to have the Great Reset completed by 2035. A world governed by socialism and Marxism where you won't own anything, but somehow you'll be happy right? Where LGBTism and all these other lying doctrines are now the state religion, and if you don't adhere to them, you're going to have a social credit score, and your ability to interact, to engage in commerce, to interact with the government is going to be severely restricted unless you're a loyal adherent. You see, the world has become accustomed to the United States bankrolling everything and pushing back on nothing, to being the world's policeman when the global elites want, but not making any waves, supporting the woke agenda with environmentalism and LGBTism and everything else. So Trump's conduct in his first 2 months in office may seem shocking and unsettling, but it needs to happen so that things can be rebalanced. We need to pray for Donald Trump and his team, his Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the intelligence community. We need to pray that Donald Trump would be successful in rooting out the socialist, woke, deep state that Barack Obama and Joe Biden built. We need to pray that the United States of America would be prosperous and be protected from its enemies during this time period, and that our leaders would know what to do and have the means to do it. More than any of that, though, we must put God first. We must put God first as a country. We have got to return to the Bible as being the Word of the living God, the authority by which we measure not just, abject moral standards, but our very lives. If we do, then we can have confidence that God will defend us. Psalms 29:11 says, "The Lord gives strength to his people, and the Lord blesses his people with peace." And isn't that what we want? Peace. Peace for ourselves and peace for the nations of the earth. So let's exalt God and let's put him first. Folks, our special guest today is former Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler from the 4th District of Missouri. Congresswoman Hartzler was a former public school teacher with a master's degree in education, but a heart for service to God and others. She served in the Missouri State Legislature for many years and then was elected to the United States Congress and served from 2011 to 2013. She was a tireless advocate for biblical values, a strong national defense, and sound fiscal discipline. She served on the House Armed Services Committee and was appointed to the Congressional Executive Committee on China. She served as the chair of the House Values Action Team, leading efforts for faith, family, and religious freedom in the United States. She has recently, since serving in Congress, was appointed by Speaker Mike Johnson to serve on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and she is going to be our guest in today's show. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm confident that it's going to be a great blessing to you. So we've got some information to share with you now. Don't go away, and we'll be right back with Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler. I want to invite you to join us for the annual Truth and Liberty Awards banquet on May 2nd, 2025 on the campus of Charis Bible College right here in Colorado. We're going to be honoring 2 Americans who've stood courageously for biblical values. Abby Johnson, the former clinic director for Planned Parenthood, whose life story was the subject of the movie Unplanned, is going to get the Samuel Adams Award. And then Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, a United States Army flight surgeon who stood up against mandatory vaccines in the military, is going to receive the Samuel Whitmore Award. There's going to be a powerful keynote message delivered by Seth Gruber, the founder and author of the 1916 Project, an eye-opening expose about the foundations of the abortion and LGBT movement in America. Tickets are $125 each and can be purchased on our website at truthandliberty.net. Now, this event is a fundraiser, so sponsors are welcome. Make plans to join us in the Rocky Mountains on May 2nd for this inspiring and beautiful evening. Well, welcome back to the Truth and Liberty Show. I'm so excited to have this opportunity to sit down now with Vicky Hartzler, former Congresswoman from the 4th District of Missouri. Vicky, you served in Congress for 12 years. Were a staunch advocate for family values, served on the Values Action Team. And you were also on the Armed Services Committee for many years, and you're an expert on America's security needs and issues, and I'm just so thankful to have you on the show.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Richard.
Well, and you're here teaching in our practical government school. Thank you for coming to do that. I know the students have been greatly blessed.
Well, it's been delightful to get to meet them. I'm so excited about what God has for them, and it's been very rewarding to be able to share with them the national security concerns that I have been apprised to over the years, and I believe every American should be aware of.
Yeah, well, it's hard to keep track. There's so much going on today,
Right.
but I think, people that are paying attention at all, our number one concern is China, right?
Right.
So there's China, but what would you say are the top 3 security threats facing our country today?
Oh, that's hard. As far as the nations, certainly China would be number one. Then you have Russia and Iran. Of course, there's non-state actors still out there. Remember ISIS and Al Qaeda, and North Korea is certainly a threat. And with our open border, we've got concerns here domestically. What could be going on? But you look within each one of those countries, and there's a tremendous amount of threats. And China, we've spent all day, over 3 hours at the school, just covering some of the domestic threats we're facing from China, as well as the military threats. And we talked about the human rights violations a little bit too. But China has a plan to become the world, to take over the world, really. And it's not laughable. They're very serious about it. They have an economic plan they've been working on for years, the Belt and Road Initiative. But they certainly have a military plan that they've been executed methodically over the last several years. And shockingly, they have outstripped us now with some of their military capabilities. They have the largest Navy in the world, the largest Army in the world. They've been building up their defenses at far greater rate than we have, and we have fallen behind in some areas. Certainly space is a concerning area. In 2007, they demonstrated that they could take out a satellite. They took out one of their own weather satellites by shooting off a missile from land. But there are a lot of other things they're working on in space that could jeopardize us. But certainly in the cyber realm, we've seen multiple attacks where they've been able to hack in and make steal secrets. China steals about $500 billion a year of American intellectual property from our businesses and from our military. This has been going on for years, but we now know they've hacked into our telecom systems. They have been able to track our telephone conversations, our text messages. But even President Biden administration, before they left, said that they have, for over 5 years, discovered they are in our infrastructure as far as controlling our electric grids, our water systems, our communication systems, and they're still there now. And so if there was a conflict with China, or if they wanted to take over Taiwan, which they have said they want to do by 2027, could they cripple our nation in many ways, either taking out GPS satellites, or could they shut down our electric grid or our water supply system for our major cities? These are just the tip of the iceberg of some of the capabilities that they've been working on. And we've got to catch up, we've got to build up, and we've got to be strong to deter aggression, whether it be China or whether it be Kim Jong-un in North Korea, whether it be Russia. All of these thugs understand strength. And Ronald Reagan said peace through strength, right. And that's still really a good mantra for us to hold on to. Well,
Vicky, it's been, 2 years since you were in Congress?
Yes.
Right? So not that long, according to most of us normal folks, but you said in class today, I heard you, that a lot has changed already in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
I guess my overriding question when it comes to Congress is it kind of just baffles me, how have we waited so long to really begin to take China seriously? It's obvious that they have an aggressive posture towards us. And are we really doing enough? What's it going to take for us to meet this threat?
Right. Well, when I arrived in Congress in 2011, I started going to briefings and hearings in Armed Services Committee. It started to be very apparent that China was really on the move, and we had better wake up and realize, we've got a problem here. And so I think, we've been focused on this, but it's hard for us just overnight to start to build up our military like it needed to be. Under President Obama, they had cut our military for several years in a row. And we have been investing more and more, but it's going to take a large investment to catch up. But not only that, we have to have the manpower. For instance, shipbuilding. We're behind in shipbuilding. China produces 50% of the shipbuilding in the world. We produce 0.2%. we only have a few places in our country building ships, and it takes us a long time even to build one ship. And we don't have, there's manpower issues. It's hard to find people who can weld and who can do these technologies. Plus, we have a security clearance problem. And then it takes a year to 18 months to get a security clearance for a new employee. And so many of these workers, if say you're a welder and you say, well, I can get a job down the road, why should I wait 18 months? So we've been trying to work on issues like that, but we just don't have the capacity anymore. You look back in World War II, when we needed to convert regular manufacturing plants and have them start churning out tanks and other armaments, well, we were making things. So we had the government could do that and could say, hey, could you convert and start making these Jeeps or whatever? And now we don't have as much manufacturing just in general, near alone defense companies, which are down to a limited amount. So we need more money, we need more focus, but it's not just military capability, it's also personnel, which thankfully, under new Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and President Trump, we're starting to see recruitment go back up. We're starting to see people want to serve, which is important. But we also have to go after the economic threat. China has been methodically building up influence around the world through their Belt and Road Initiative and debt trap diplomacy, loaning third world countries money at very high interest rates, which they can't keep going. And so China takes over their ports again or uses their collateral for their natural resources, their rare earth minerals, to gain a foothold all over the world. So Congress has taken some steps to try to address that, to provide a fund through the BUILD Act that third world countries can come to us and get loans to help build their railway in their country or something instead of going to China. But we've got a whole approach that we need to do. The State Department also needs to be going out and meeting with the government leaders of all these small countries, these small islands, these third world countries. China goes into these third world countries with their top generals, maybe a top person in government, and say, we want to be your friend. They court them, they build them. And we have in the past ignored trying to build those relationships with some of those countries. And now I think we're waking up and reaching out to those countries saying we want to build more alliances with you, but we've got to catch up.
Well, what do you think about Donald Trump's choice for Secretary of Defense and Director of National Intelligence? Are we going to be back on the right track now?
Yeah, I'm very pleased with Pete Hegseth, and I think his background in the military, his firsthand experience, his understanding and seeing the demise that has occurred over the last few years, he has a clear path in what we need to do to get our military back on track. We need to focus once again on fighting and winning wars and not DEI. Not having soldiers come in for PowerPoint presentations on which pronouns to use, instead focus on the enemy's weapon systems and what we need to do to take them out and things. So I think we're definitely on the right track. Recruitment is back up, but it's going to take a while just to build the capacity, the amount of weaponry that we need. But I think our focus is in the right place now. So I'm encouraged.
Well, I am too. It's kind of a question of time, though, isn't it? Right? Do we have enough time?
Right.
With China's buildup. The funny thing too is you mentioned economic security. Kevin Freeman was on our show, and he was saying that China has I apologize, it was Frank Gaffney. He said China declared full economic war on us several years ago, and it just seems like the president for the last 4 years, Joe Biden, was completely oblivious to lots of things, Vicky.
Yes.
But China was really not on the radar at all for him, not a priority. You know, how big a problem is DEI in the federal government and in Department of Defense? How much have we wasted on that, so to speak, and what needs to be done?
A lot, a lot. I mean, the military, which my dad was part of that as an Army reservist, but it used to be where you could come from any background, any ethnicity, any part of the United States. It didn't matter. You came and became one fighting force. And this person to your right and left became your brother, your sister, and you were going to look out for their back. And you were there focused on the enemy and what we needed to do. And instead of promoting unity and cohesion, the DEI totally started separating them into groups and having sessions on, well, where do you come from? Well, do you feel like you're being picked on? Well, forcing conversations like that. So all of a sudden, soldiers were looking at each other in distrust or feeling that they weren't unified, or maybe I am being picked on. And this is crazy. It is actually opposite of the original goal of the military, to make you a one fighting force. And so now that we're getting rid of that, I think we're going to get back on track to focusing on the mission. And certainly the bringing in of individuals who couldn't serve just because it's politically correct with the transgenders, didn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
With the procedures, the health procedures they had to go through, they couldn't serve. So why are you doing that?
Yeah.
So I think we're on a much better track now.
Well, let's shift gears and talk about Ukraine if we can.
Sure.
The Donald Trump, it's obviously a high priority of him to try to get a peace deal negotiated. And how do you feel about the job he's doing so far?
Well, it needs to be solved. I had a chance to go to Ukraine before this all happened several years ago, and I have to say I was so impressed with the people of that country. I didn't get to meet with President Zelensky, but I met with some members of parliament. I met with some of their soldiers, their defense minister. And they were a younger generation, mainly in their 20s and 30s, the ones I met with, very sharp. And they said, we view ourselves as being the Patrick Henry and the Thomas Jeffersons of our days.
Wow.
We are throwing off the totalitarianism of the past. We're rooting out the corruption. We want to be like you. We are setting a path towards democracy, freedom, free enterprise. We want to align with the EU and with America, and we want Ukraine to be like America. And I came away so encouraged. And so it was so disheartening for me to see what transpired with Putin and the weakness of President Biden. When Putin aligned over 100,000 troops and tanks on their border and was threatening to go in, and Biden would not impose sanctions on them or take action then. He just kept saying, now, if you go in, we're going to put sanctions on you. And Putin only understands strength, and he recognized the weakness after what happened in Afghanistan. And he said, here's my opportunity, and he rolled in, and he's been massacring these freedom-loving, democratic-loving people. But the war, they have valiantly fought, but they're suffering. The news I've gotten out of Ukraine is they're having a problem with desertion. They've charged over 100,000 of their troops with desertion. Of the original 300,000 soldiers they think they may have had to begin with, they believe up to possibly 200,000 have deserted. They're physically spent, they're emotionally spent, they're injured. They leave they were injured and go to the hospital, and then they just don't return. So President Zelensky is suffering from this reality, and so I don't know how much longer you can continue on. So if we can broker peace, it makes sense. But I can understand Zelensky's desire to keep fighting and not lose any territory. But we'll see what comes of this. Certainly, I hope the fighting can stop. I hope Russia will recognize that they're a sovereign nation and they have the ability to live freely and democratically and safely. But there'll probably be some territory to have to be negotiated. And certainly peacekeeping forces, and whether Ukraine joins NATO or not will be probably part of the discussion. But what security assurances can Ukraine have? Remember, Ukraine used to have nuclear weapons, and under the Budapest Agreement, they agreed to get rid of their nuclear weapons several years ago in exchange for security, and that promise that Russia would invade them. So I can understand their reluctance and their hesitancy to agree to whatever Putin says.
That's very interesting. What parties were making assurances of security at that time?
I think I don't quote me on this, I need to study that, but I believe it was Russia But, you know, look,
Well, it's understandable Zelensky wanting security, but
yeah.
it's hard to imagine a situation where the United States would put boots on the ground
No.
in Ukraine. That
Right.
would be really jeopardizing
Right.
our nation and our soldiers.
Sure. I believe a couple of countries in Europe have, floated the idea that possibly they'd be willing to send troops as a peacekeeping force. I think it'd be great if they could have some people there from other countries. I think it would be a deterrent for Russia. And of course, from what I've heard, Putin doesn't want that.
Yeah.
And I can understand that. But if hey, you're not going to invade, then why should you worry if there's, peacekeeping forces there or not? So I think he's showing his real intent that he's going to play nice for a while, thereby leaves, and then he could once again attack. And obviously, that's what Ukraine's concerned about.
Right, obviously. So it's hard to imagine how there could be lasting peace without some kind of military presence.
Yeah.
The president, Donald Trump, has been kind of alluding to the idea that we'll have mineral rights and investment and mining and whatever in rare earth minerals in Ukraine, and that somehow that's going to be a deterrent to Russia. Do you buy that argument?
It's an interesting concept, and I think it might work. Because if you have a lot of U.S. investment there, U.S. companies that are encouraged by President Trump, look, I got you this deal. Our country needs rare earth minerals. Here's an opportunity. Let's encourage you to go over there. So we have companies go and invest manpower and money into an operation like that. Then President Trump and our country has a vested interest in the peace and security of that nation. And if Putin were to come in again, I could see President Trump not viewing that favorably and saying you crossed the red line. Mm-hmm. And so now we are going to unload on you.
Then are we in a situation where we're with Russia?
Well, yeah, potentially.
Oh, we're leading with our chin on this thing.
I know. There's no easy answers.
Yes,
but
it's difficult, isn't it?
But
well, what about the Middle East, Vicky? October 7th, 2023, Hamas invades Israel, commits some of the worst atrocities I've ever heard of.
Right.
I think anybody who really faces the truth about what happened is appalled. Israel has fought back and kind of destroyed a lot of Hezbollah and Hamas, but then they entered into this truce with Hamas now, and Hamas is not totally gone. And I guess the big question is, what's going to happen with the Gaza Strip now? Who's going to control that? And how are they going to stop Hamas from reemerging?
I know. There's no easy answers there. Yeah. And it is sickening what has happened there, truly evil. It's encouraging the gains that Israel has made in taking out some of the leadership, both in Hamas and Hezbollah. And I'm thankful now, for some of the pushback on the Houthis. Mm-hmm. Those are the three proxies of Iran that have been. But Hamas, digging the tunnels like they have and have no regard for civilians, and how they use that as their military strategy is just reprehensible. But they know the world opinion will turn against Israel if they see little children and women killed. And so they build their tunnels, put their weapons in schools and under schools and in hospitals and in residential neighborhoods. And they know that if Israel has to take out those tunnels or, the other people are going to be killed. And so there's still a lot of tunnels there. There's still a lot of infrastructure that hasn't been destroyed. I think it will be difficult to take out Hamas totally. It's kind of like cancer. They'll keep popping up and growing elsewhere, but certainly they have degraded that. I think the creative solution that has some merit is to have a coalition of Middle Eastern Muslim countries help govern that area, whether it be Egypt, UAE, Qatar. I don't know who all the players would be, but I think maybe that would have maybe some possibility.
What about Donald Trump setting up, the Riviera of the Middle East? Do you think that's going to work?
I don't know about him doing it, but when I first became familiar with Gaza and studying and looking at that, the comment that was made to me is that Israel had control of that area.
Yes.
After the Six-Day War, 1967, Israel took control of that area. And then they were coerced and pressured by international bodies in 2005 to do a land for peace swap, give this up, let the people have their own determination of their government, and we'll have peace. So they gave that area up. And when they talked about that, they talked about that section of land could be the Riviera. It's on the Mediterranean, beautiful beaches. There's a lot of good farmland that a lot of Israeli farmers were farming there, and they agreed they just had to leave their farms and left. And they gave that all just like on a silver platter to the Palestinians who lived there. And within 2 years, they elected Hamas to be their leadership.
Known terrorists.
Known terrorists. And then Hamas has come in, controlled the people, shut it down, and have been terrorizing it ever since. So there is the possibility. That's what's sad. They could have turned that area into an economic engine that would have been a blessing to them, and they could have lived in peace, but they chose to go the route of putting terrorists in charge. So I'm hopeful whoever does control that area will utilize some of those resources in the area and build some hotels. But you're not going to have tourists there unless there's security. Right. So they've got to make sure that it's safe, but maybe start in small steps, but certainly get the farming going again.
Well, you know, the cry on American college campuses from all the pro-Hamas demonstrations is they use the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." That slogan is calling for the eradication of the nation of Israel. With that mindset, how can we ever allow them, you know, to live, you know, be recognized as a nation state or have, you know, true freedom if they are actually dedicated to that? What are your thoughts?
No, I agree. It's just been reprehensible how people have said it. I think it shows ignorance too. I've been shocked and disappointed at the amount of anti-Semitism on our college campuses from American students. I'm not surprised at maybe foreign students that are here or from that area perhaps, or from a different background, but Americans standing up and fighting and, protesting for Hamas or for that. Like I said, it either shows their ignorance or just that they've been indoctrinated so much. It's very disheartening because Israel is our greatest friend in the UN. They're our greatest economic friend there, the only democracy in the Middle East. They're an economic engine. They provide security and stability to the region. There's every reason. Plus, for those of us who are Christians, there's a spiritual reason that we need to support them. Abraham, God told him, who blesses this nation will be blessed, who curses him will be cursed. And I believe part of the reason the United States has been blessed is because we have been a blessing to Israel. And if ever we abandon that, I think we risk that blessing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you actually are educated as a educator, a teacher, right? Taught school for a while. You got a master's degree in education.
Right.
What is the state of America's education system? These students are coming out and they think America's a systemically racist nation. They think a person can actually choose their gender, and that there's no such thing as truth. What have we done to our kids in this nation, Vicki?
It's sad. So many schools and teachers are indoctrinating kids with this philosophy. I'll have to say, though, speak up for some teachers. It's not every school. There's a lot of good teachers out there. I believe it's a calling to be a Christian, to be a teacher in the public school setting. So I would encourage young people to consider doing that. But it is a war for the heart and minds of our kids. What is taught, the curriculum, how it's taught, the priorities. That's why people need to be involved. And I've been encouraged at the number of parents now who are getting involved in school board and people running for school board to take these things back, take back our schools and make sure our kids are taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and not, all of these other topics which are harmful to them. So that's good. But I have to say part of the problem is the breakdown of the American family, too, and the lack of morality. And it all goes back to people need Jesus.
Yeah.
That's the real hope for our nation, is that families would have their home run by mom and dad with a life centered on the Lord, and their children being raised in the fear and admiration of the Lord. And so I think that's going to, because teachers are dealing with a lot. So many children come here nowadays, and they don't have parental support, or they may not have had breakfast, and their parents are involved in drugs. And anyway, there's a lot of that too that teachers are dealing with, and it's hard to teach them that when they can't focus, because they haven't had food, or their parents have been, if they have parents, or been arguing and things like that. So there's a lot of issues, but certainly from a government standpoint, we can't legislate those things. We can, though, make sure that the curriculum is solid, that kids are loved, but there's a safe environment at school, but that there's guidelines too for behavior, and kids are encouraged to be all they can be and equipped thoroughly.
Well, so Donald Trump is pushing for the closure, or at least reducing to the bare bones, the Department of Education federally, right? What do you think of that idea?
Well, I think it's mostly fine. Of course, as you said, I had a master's degree in education. When I was elected to go to Congress and we're supposed to request which committees we want to be on, I specifically did not choose the Education Committee because I thought really there shouldn't be that much of a role at the federal level for education. When I was a state representative, I was on the state committee, and that's where a lot of important decisions are made. What will happen there's several pieces of legislation that have passed that would still be in effect, even if you got rid of the department. And most of them have to do with funding for like special education students, for reading programs, for school transportation, and for vocational education. Those are 4 that I can think of off the top of my head. So even if you didn't have the department, those programs would still be going. Maybe they would be moved over under a different agency. But I don't think parents would mind too much. I mean, those are programs really where you're not getting the DEI and that sort of thing. We're just getting some federal funds that goes to the states, and then they'll go to the special education program or whatever. But I'll have to say that's not going to be the total solution.
Right.
If you turn things back to the states, that's great for Missouri and conservative states. But if California has control of what their kids teach, they're going to just keep double down on what they're doing now. So it's not the total solution, which goes back to curriculum, which goes back to parental involvement. It goes back to getting Christians elected at the state level and taking back the State Department of Education's and what curriculum is taught there. So it's maybe a piece, but it's not going to be the total solution.
So maybe we could get a little sort of philosophical for just a second. You mentioned that the real solution for our country is Jesus. That really what we need is to get people saved and serving Christ.
Yeah.
And I completely 100% agree with that. But on the other hand, God does call us to government and calls people to government like yourself. Like you said in class today, Romans 13:4 says you are the minister of God for good. How does that work? We're called to win the world for Christ. Well, what's the role of government? Is that something we should just ignore and just, get everybody saved? Is it all one or the other, or is it some amazing blend of these things?
Yeah, it's definitely a blend. You need both. We're supposed to contend for the faith, and it is a calling to be involved in government, and it is established by God to help order things. So there's even a passage in Scripture that says our God is our King, and He's our lawmaker, and He's our
Isaiah.
Here's all 3 branches it mentions there, and so there's the model for government that's there, and it's important to have righteous leaders and godly leaders. And if we don't have Christians step up and run for office and be willing to serve, then we're going to get people who don't share their views and values. So it's a critical piece. But then too, sometimes I meet people who think, well, it's the whole solution is this election is going to solve the problem. We just got to get so-and-so elected or whatever. But if we're not out fulfilling the Great Commission, then that lawmaker isn't going to have the backing. The people aren't going to support the values that they want to vote on. And they'll get voted out of office. You've got to, do both.
Yeah.
You need to evangelize and let people know God's plan for them, His purpose, and then they'll support policies that the Bible and God supports. So
12 years in Congress, how did you balance this question in your own heart? Did you have opportunity to, share the gospel on Capitol Hill and minister to other people? As just one example.
Yeah, well, I had interns, and so that's a wonderful opportunity. You have these sharp young people come in and work for a semester, and I can't take credit for this, but I would hire. I had some wonderful staff that were Christians, and one of my staff members invited one of my interns to go to church with her, and she was so excited because she said, as a little girl, she had always wanted to go to church, but her parents didn't go to church, and she even asked them, "Can I go to church down the street? I want," and they said, "No, we're not going to take you." And she'd always wanted to go to church. And because my staff invited her, she was so excited. She went and she accepted the Lord the first day and started just so excited, started going to Bible studies and things. And so there's that opportunity. But as an elected official, I had an opportunity to talk to constituents. I had an opportunity to talk to people at work in the Capitol police officers and staffers and things. And fellow members, you just, like any other Christian, wherever you work, you notice somebody's down, or you try to be in tune with the Spirit. Who can I talk to and say, "How are you doing? Well, can I pray for you?" And it's a wonderful opportunity just to be a light wherever you are, whether you're in Congress or whether you're working at the steel factory or in school as a teacher. God wants us to be salt and light everywhere and to tell the world. And I'm convicted by the scripture in Romans that says, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, but how can they call on the one whom they haven't believed in? And how can they believe in someone if they haven't heard?
Right.
And how could they hear unless someone preaches to them? And so I'm now on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. It's a 2-year appointment. The commission was established 25 years ago, but we're an bipartisan advisory board agency for Congress and the administration, and we monitor all the religious freedom around the world and advocate for it, and we call out the worst actors for what they're doing. And as I have a chance to travel to other countries and visit with people of faith in other countries, I'm coming to appreciate even more the importance of America. How other Christians, other people around the world look to America and they beg us, please stay strong for righteousness, for first thing. Stay strong to the values that we uphold. Be that shining city on the hill.
Wow.
But then speak up for us. Don't leave us. You give us hope as we contend with our authoritarian government here, or one who's suppressing our religious freedom. We remember those people in your country who stood up and gained freedom, and that's our hope. And so keep speaking up for us, keep fighting for us.
It's, I think it's amazing how other people look to America for leadership. We don't. No. Being born and raised here, we don't really realize that, right. But I've heard that before. Representative Chris Smith, a House member from New Jersey, just held a hearing on the subject of Nigeria. And, the terrorist organization there, Boko Haram, and other Muslims have been terrorizing the church there for many years with, I don't even know the number now, Vicky, perhaps you're aware of it, of the number of Christians that have been murdered. And now they're turning on moderate so-called Muslims too. He wants the country labeled as a country of particular concern, Representative Smith. What significance would that be? And do you agree with that, or do we need to do more for the Christians in Nigeria?
No, you're right. I'm so glad. Chris Smith is such a champion for life and for religious liberties and so many things. He's a good friend of mine, and I'm so glad that he held that hearing. Yeah, there have been more Christians killed in Nigeria than any other parts of the world. They estimate 50,000 Christians since 2009 that have been killed there, which is just mind-boggling. Multiple churches destroyed and things. And so our commission makes recommendations every year on the worst offenders and what our country can do. And we recommended that Nigeria be designated the country of particular concern. That is the worst label a country could be labeled with from our government. And it impacts our foreign policy with that government. So if our government does that, then the law, the International Religious Freedom Act, which sets this up, gives a toolbox of options that our government can do to try to get that country to stop hurting people and to go the right way. It's carrot and sticks options, but it could be denial of any foreign aid no military engagements can be cut off, no just partnerships or travel or trips. We can sanction individuals, we can sanction the government. Those are a lot of carrot things. Or we can give, sticks. We can give carrots too, of encouragement. If you were to take some steps, then we'll give you some foreign aid to help your police training so we can protect people, whatever. So the commission, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, a couple years ago before I was on, made that recommendation that our government do that. And under President Trump, under Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, they did. They designated that as a country of particular concern. Nigeria, yeah. A couple of months before the end of his term. President Biden was elected. He came in office. Within the first month, he removed that designation. Maybe he thought, well, we don't want to make them mad. We don't want them to turn and join these other groups. I do not know. But I can tell you our commission is going to continue to recommend that this gets the country of particular concern. Next week, we're actually rolling out a 2025 annual report where it'll become public what our recommendations are. Then it'll be up to Marco Rubio, or Secretary of State, and President Trump whether they follow through or not with that. I'm hopeful they will, because Secretary Rubio was a champion for religious liberty when he was a senator.
Oh, wow.
And he introduced a lot of the bills to promote religious liberty. I'm sure he's aware already of the atrocities going on in Nigeria, and he's very smart and deft in being able to work with them. And you can impose it. There's an option where you can give waivers too, okay? So maybe you could say, well, we're going to designate you this, but we'll give you a waiver and not take our money back if you start protecting, Christians. I don't know.
Yeah, lots of...
Gives them some tools, some leverage, something. Yeah.
Well, so now, what's the name of the organization you're with again? It's the
U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom.
Okay, and do they have a website that
Please go to the website. Absolutely. It's uscirf.gov.
Okay.
And on that, you can learn more about what we're doing. There's reports on every country. There's also a victims list where we keep a record of people who are in prison right now. Wow. And you can click on it, read their story, pray for them, help them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Vicky, if people want to follow what you're doing, is there a way for them to do that? You've been kind of off the radar for a couple of years.
Still haven't gotten back into the social media much yet, so not really.
Okay.
Sorry.
Come enroll in Practical Government School and you get to hear her teach. How's that sound?
Yeah, well, maybe in the future I will.
Maybe in the future. All right. Well, it's been so great having you on the show today. I really appreciate it. It's been just so informative.
Well, it's been great to visit with you, and I appreciate all you do, Truth and Liberty, and appreciate the audience who loves this country and are watching and praying for it.
Amen. Thank you. Well, folks, if you're watching today, I want to remind you about our free gift. It's called A Message to Teenagers from an Old Man. This is a book by Andrew Womack, who I don't think is that old, but it's a little collection of some pearls of wisdom that he's gleaned in his 55-plus years of Christian ministry and teaching, and it's a great little booklet for any young person. So if you've got teenage sons or daughters, grandkids, nieces, nephews, I really encourage you to take advantage of this offer. Just go to our website today at truthandlibertygtn.com, and you can claim a free copy of A Message to Teenagers from an Old Man. Also wanted to remind everybody about our upcoming Truth and Liberty Awards Banquet on May the 2nd, 6 p.m. here in Woodland Park. You can find out all the information on our website at truthandliberty.net. And again, thanks for watching today. It's been a great program, and we look forward to seeing you again next time here on Truth and Liberty.